Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds, in under 30 ways to follow the great plan. Today, I am your old blood host, Phil, and joining me is my Scarblood veteran, Skyler. How you doing, Skyler?
Feeling jawsome.
Jawsome? Nice. Is that a reference to the, I don't remember if it was early 90s or late 80s cartoon show, a Street Sharks?
Street Sharks, it totally is.
All right, perfect. I hope that our listeners get the reference. So if you couldn't tell, today we are coming at you talking about the Jaws of Itzl. We are recording this episode just right here at the end of the year on December 30th. Not a whole lot going on in the Underworld sphere right now. We've had our giant wave of product, and everybody's just kind of been able to get their hands on as much of it as is available. Unfortunately, that's still a little bit of a problem. And just start to get a feel for the second edition. Before we actually start talking Jaws, though, we have our usual segments. We are going to start with some community shout outs. In light of wanting to talk new warbands, new decks, as a reminder to folks, over on the Battle Mallet podcast website, they actually have a list of decks, pre-built decks that you can just grab and play. Some of those are things they have constructed just to like have a built-out list for all the different warbands, but some of those are tournament decks, some coming most recently from the World Championships of Warhammer. So if you are somebody who is like, man, look at all these warbands, all these new rules, I don't know what to do or where to start, that can be a really great jumping off point. And then another thing that has come up fairly recently is R77, a user over on Discord, has been doing this stat project to compile like win-loss records for different warbands, just so that we have a better comprehension of who's playing what and how are they performing. And he just posted his most recent sort of breakdown of that data so that we have a view of the current meta, very early meta of season 2 of Warhammer Underworlds. I personally haven't gotten a chance to even take a look at it yet, but I am certainly looking forward to checking it out. Should be a pretty quick read just to get an understanding of the meta, but it is a really cool thing for somebody to have taken on to sort of give that data to the community. Skyler, any community shoutouts that you would like to call out?
Yeah, I'd like to jump on the end of the year celebrations here and say, go check out the Spent Glory website. They have a 2024 wrap year in review that I'd recommend. Just reading through and enjoying like how big of a year it's been, how interesting of a year it's been for Underworlds. This year housed the end of the previous edition, start of the next, and it's been a wild ride of a year. We've seen a lot of creators emerge in the space, and that's been really exciting. If you have any interest in creating, get out there and get going. Make that your New Year's resolution. When Fish Mode started the site, he makes a comment on that blog about how one of the reasons he started it was because he didn't want to, like, he was so engaged in commenting on like Facebook comments and stuff like that he wanted a way to like put it all in one place and like link people to it instead of just typing it out and copy and pasting it everywhere.
Yeah.
And like from that, he's now the place that we direct people to easily the most, and his site has registered 100,000 views here before the end of the year, and that's a cool milestone to have crossed. So went from somebody who just had passion for the game and just wanted to give people kind of a hub of it's where love letters are hosted. It's where so many great resources for the game have been hosted, and it's originally just wanting to create and get things out there, and now it's crossed 100,000 views. So very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Big props. That's a big lift, and it's in no small part due to the fact that Fish Mode's content is always very good, very well thought out, but then also very consistent. He's putting out a lot of posts. As someone, obviously, who is working in this creator content sphere, uh, writing blog posts is not a simple and quick endeavor, or at least it isn't for us. So I just want to say even more so, big shout out to being able to crank out so many articles.
Strong agree, and congratulations on the milestone there, Fish Mode.
Yeah. All right. So that is our normal segments. I don't think there's a whole lot to say about the what the heck is going on with us right now. It has been a minute since we have used this segment, and it is because we've had so many new things come out. It is something that we will definitely be revisiting. I think it is definitely past due for us to start giving hobby updates, but I think it will wait again for this time. But I know at least Brian has some irons in the fire, and I'm getting some stuff ready for the hobby desk myself. So it'll be back soon. But for today, we are once again going to give a quick review / breakdown of our thoughts of a warband. And as you may or may not know, we had the previous episode with Davey and Brian talking about the gardeners, and so this one we're going to be breaking down the Jaws. So to start things off, the Jaws, what type of warband are these, Skyler, officially?
What are they officially, Phil?
Oh, okay.
I would say they're flex.
Well, officially, they are labeled as strike.
Are they really? Right.
They're listed as being a strike warband. But I think it is worth pointing out, as you just mentioned, that although they have that strike label, they certainly can do some other things. So we have this officially strike warband. What's going on with these guys? What does their sort of warband makeup look like?
Yeah, so we've got 3 beefy looking dinosaurs, and this is where I have to like self-deprecate on the knowledge that I have for the lore, because they look like 3 awesome dinosaurs to me.
Oh, okay.
Whereas I know that they're properly, a specific type of. I'm gonna just pass it straight back over to you. The other thing that makes up the warband is this pile of snakes and frogs, all on a small little base with a pretty memey looking statue face, and they're all kind of very interested in one direction.
Yeah, something has drawn their attention quite significantly. So to just recap, we've got 3 large fighters, one sort of weird fighter. And for those of you who are interested in the lore, these are called Saurus. That is the type of like being that they are in the mortal realms. The Saurus are effectively lizard people. They kind of look like dinosaurs. And they're part of the larger faction in the Age of Sigmar universe called the Seraphon. And they are basically space dinosaur people that are led by frogs. So I'll leave that there. If you want more more in-depth like lore about these guys, you can head on over to themortalrealms.com, which is where our other blogs and our other podcasts are hosted. And we have a number of different episodes from over the years with the battle tomes for the Seraphon as they have come out and given some lore breakdowns. So if you're interested in that, that is a already recorded resource that you can get a much deeper understanding of the Seraphon. But
resource I should check out.
If you are interested in Age of Sigmar lore, that is a cool thing to do, and we would appreciate it. But yeah, so 3 elite fighters, and by elite I mean by 2nd edition standards, they are 5 wounds apiece. They have block as their defense characteristic, and they have a relatively average movement of 3. So we've got these like big scary guys. and then we've got this weird one health, two dodge defense pile of snakes. Um, so so when you see that these are labeled as strike, uh, I think in some ways that is sort of referencing the fact that they have some pretty scary attack profiles. What sort of stands out to you about these fighters' profiles, Skyler?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the 5 health is easily something, that is just very difficult to chew through when your average attack is 2. Like, you're going to need sources of 3 damage to really get through them. Um, but Crojack starts hitting for 3 on 2 hammers, which can be a fairly accurate attack. And, once he inspires, that goes up to 4 swords, which. Um, I'm curious about like the accuracy comparison there. But what I can tell you for sure is as soon as you're bumping, from 2 to 4 dice, you're increasing the chances of overrun,
Yeah,
which leans more into that flex picture. Like, I think they're very good at claiming territory, if you will.
yeah,
um, Especially with when you look at their war scroll and you roll in the ability obstinate. These guys are saying, hey, for the next or until the end of the battle round, this particular fighter isn't going to be able to be moved. It's like, okay, so now I have to chew through 5 health in order to move that fighter. That's gonna be pretty tough.
yeah. Absolutely. Just as a very quick rundown, I will read the ability verbatim. It says, use this in a power step. Pick a friendly Saurus, which is your 3 big guys. That fighter cannot be driven back until the end of the battle round. You can only use this once per game. Um, and to Skylar's point, having to chew through 5 wounds, that's no joke. Most of the time, that's going to be 3 attacks at at best. That's assuming you hit all of those. You might be able to do it in 2 if you have a bigger fighter. But basically, that can be a serious roadblock, either to your holding of treasure and you're just annoyed that your opponent is standing there, or if they are themselves wanting to hold treasure. So, yeah, sort of a weird like that. I think to your point earlier is to say this is an ability that does not read strike to me, right? Like this is the kind of ability that you would give to a fighter when you're wanting to say, hey, you can go do some hold, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, and I think it's probably worth calling out now, since we're talking about their war scroll. Um, Sort of the other piece that goes along with this, and that's their like main war scroll ability, which is called predatory fighters. So for each of these Saurus, they have an ability that says use this immediately after an enemy fighter's failed attack if the target was a friendly Saurus and the save roll contained any blocks. And then you get to inflict 1 damage on the enemy fighter. It is worth pointing out this was updated in a like day 1 errata to say that the attack has to be from a melee weapon specifically, so range 1 or 2. But either way, like it puts your opponent in sort of a weird spot where you're like, okay, these big scary lizard guys are now in my face and maybe standing on the treasure tokens that I want. And if I want to get them off, I have to risk the chance that if I miss this, I might just take damage for having tried to move them. Like that feels kind of bad, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've run into some really like interesting scenarios already. You were asking me to like highlight something, on their stats that stood out to me.
Yeah.
And one thing I failed to mention is Rotac goes up to 2 damage on range 2.
Yeah.
They all go up to 4 swords, which I think is important to highlight because again it folds into that flex picture of they're going to be throwing a lot of dice at you, giving them that higher chance at crits. So there's a strong likelihood that they're going to be able to activate overrun more consistently than most other warbands. And with Rotac, the reason I wanted to highlight him is if you drive him back because of a failed tie with a melee attack, and I guess this is true for anybody, but it particularly has stung me a lot with Rotac. is driving them back with a range 1 or a range 2 attack isn't going to save you from predatory fighters. If they roll that shield, they're still getting that jaw back on you and dealing
Mm-hmm.
that 1 damage. And with Rotac, that's particularly punishing because that range 2 says, like, I don't even have to move from this position to try to hit you back. And that range 2 has been it's interesting trying to find your priority target when you're fighting this warband. Like Crojax is, an easy target pre-inspire. You want to take him down because you don't want to deal with those 2 shields. You want that 3 bounty, and you don't want that 3 damage to be so like easily prevalent and be able to be stacked, with great strength. So those are some kind of like lessons I've learned going against them. Is your target selection is can be difficult. I think it's Crojax before Inspire, but then like Rotac is probably next one that you're worried about. Sokar is probably the last target you're worried about, but this always depends as well as to like what your opponent is stacking into place for upgrades, what these positions look like. It's never as cut and dry as that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just to sort of round out talking about the different stats for the fighters. So as you said, like they all go to 4 swords, which is pretty accurate. It's comparable to 3 hammers, so like it's solid. Um, but as to your point of like making it hard to pick your targets, yeah, the range is really annoying on Rotak, but Sokar actually increases his speed on Inspire. And he also picks up crit grievous, so he's a second source of 3 damage. And when you're throwing 4 dice, as you said, the chance for crits is not small. So there are, I think, hard choices in how to handle these fighters, which I think is actually a good thing when you're playing with an elite warband. I think a great classic example from season 1 was with Wolf Riders. Why am I forgetting the name?
Oh, sorry. Rippus Snarlfangs.
Yeah. Snarlfangs. And so they sort of baked in this thing of like, okay, you've got 2 clearly weaker fighters, and so they're not the priority. But they gave you this sort of bad choice where if you did go after Ripa and his better stats to get them off the board, then you inspired the other 2 and they got better. So it was like, ooh, cool. We sort of have this elite warband where you have a small number of fighters, but you kind of are given a bad choice. I think
I really like the pusher pull there.
yeah, and I think you kind of end up in the same situation here where it's like, there's not really like one of these guys that seems like fully ideal to take down, and they can all do a lot of work. They all have 2 damage base to start it, or more, and they have solid stats. So a really cool thing with them there. So that's a pretty good overview of the Saurus, but we've got these Venomites. Their attack is basically non-existent. They're range 1, 2 swords for 1 damage. They're still move 3. They don't give up any bounty though. So like what's the deal? Why have these guys here?
Yeah. Well, the deal for these guys is on their war scroll. And so that's called instinctual control. And it's one of their 3 abilities, or 4, I guess we could say 4 abilities. Sometimes when you're looking at the war scrolls, you segment things out. But no, it's 2 passive abilities and 2 active abilities. So
Yep.
this is the 3rd ability on their war scroll we've hit. We still have yet to hit Savage Mauling and their Inspire. But Instinctual Control reads, use this immediately after you pick a target as part of an attack made by a friendly Saurus. Pick a friendly minion with no move or charge tokens. That fighter can move. So they've kind of got the same thing going on that the Hexbane dogs have here, where they can once per round, unless you're able to get rid of the move or charge tokens that they may have taken on at any point in time, you can use this to move them. It's not a push, So it means like it will block itself from being used again. That's why it really kind of comes in as this once per round sort of ability. But it's really clutch. You've already been having fun toying around with it against me.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, a positional piece like that is always nice. That they're this low incentive piece where it's like if you're going to spend resources taking them off the board, you're not getting a payout for it outside of reducing the utility of the sort, of the draws here.
Yeah. And, you sort of are almost punished for killing the Venomites because it does then make it much easier for your opponent to get to the charged out state. Because
Exactly.
normally you wouldn't want to charge with the Venomites. So, um, it does allow for this interesting push pull. I agree that like having this positional piece is so huge. Free movement is always really strong, and um, it further lends to being able to flex because these minions can hold. There's like nothing to say that beasts, not that beast is even a thing in second edition, but like there's nothing to stop them from holding treasure. So you could end up like charging into a position to hold and then in the same turn grabbing another token, or like just out of sequence getting an extra token held after charging somewhere else. Those are always really strong plays that can be hard for your opponent to see coming. And I think it allows for a lot of flexibility with the warband. And I personally I think is like low key the one thing that sort of makes this warband have more depth than just three big guys that come and smash your face.
I would agree strongly. I think it's easy to want to remove them from the board because they might be, as you said, holding an objective. They might be providing the utility of like just an impromptu support all of a sudden up in your face. Like the fact that there's no restrictions on this fighter, that they can hold. They can do everything that everybody else can do. It's just they're just not going to be attacking with accuracy or damage. Like it means like that you might want to remove them from the board, but you really have to weigh that out. So you have to think to yourself like, I can take them out with a ping. So like they aren't considered vulnerable, which is interesting. Like looking through the rule book, they're they haven't taken any damage yet. And I think if I remember correctly, I don't have the rules in front of me right now, but the way I remember Wellner of our local bringing this up to me that, one health fighters aren't considered vulnerable in this edition. They weren't in the previous edition either. And the way that's worded is because they have to have taken on damage already.
Yep.
And then be one damage away from death. So most cards that deal a damage, a lot of them are, or even abilities, are vulnerable gated, and that's not the case here. So you can use a lot of those types of tools to take this fighter out, but then you're, as you mentioned, and I'm really glad you highlighted this, you're opening up their capability to perform well in that charged out state, where if you let them keep the Venomites and you're able to manage the warband against them in other ways, outside of picking on the Venomites, then you can keep them having to think about that move token, and if they really want to take it on. I think that's interesting. I could totally see like a Cataclysm build, and I know this is kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but this is like the one little Venomite point with the vulnerability I still wanted to mention. Like a Cataclysm build with that card that's like, hey, deal one damage to an enemy fighter, or as much damage as you want to one of your own fighters.
Oh, sure.
Up to your like Cataclysm value or something like that. You could maybe be ready at a moment's notice to sacrifice your own Venomites to bring that charge state online. Probably a later game play, but it's there. It's fun. I want to see it happen.
And then also be able to for those who don't remember or know, for Cataclysm, one of the conditions for moving your Cataclysm counter up is having the first of your friendly fighters to die in a round. So if you kill them yourself, you can control when that happens. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, some higher level play there. I think, as I said, the Venomites are what really make this warband interesting. I think it allows for them to be more flex. Not that you couldn't just play them flex without the Venomites, but I think it would feel it would kind of feel counterintuitive to do that. I think if you didn't have the Venomites and the like free move and stuff.
Yeah,
So
I was surprised that their move was wide open. Like if it was, they can move, but they have to end adjacent to the source that just activated,
yeah,
right?
right.
All of a sudden, you've solidified the strike identity, like much further
Yeah,
because like they have to be in a brawl if they're going to join. But
yeah,
that's not the case here.
yeah. And I suppose it's worth highlighting that is the other scenario of like you use them, you move them up before the attack actually happens so that they're providing support. So you get that flanked state or maybe even surrounded by having them come in. So you can use them aggressively. You kind of just have that flexibility. So again, it feels flex despite them being called strike. Uh, as you mentioned, we do have two more abilities on the War Scroll. I'll just run through these quickly because there's not like a good way to sort of tie all these together. But um, I think Savage Mauling kind of ties into the Inspire. So I'll start there. The Inspire is kind of a weird Inspire. I think this might be the one like trickiest part of the Warband, or at least in my experience and my thoughts on it.
It's wonky at the very
Yeah,
least.
yeah, yeah. So it says after inflicting damage on an enemy fighter in your opponent's power step or action step, pick a friendly fighter and inspire that fighter. Um, there are not that many ways to do this in the game. If you think about it, usually the only way that you're inflicting damage in the power step is through pings. And it specifically says your opponent's power step. So you have to remember if you're trying to inspire, you need to use the pings in your opponent's power step. And there are a number of pings now that are tied to dice, so it's not even 100%.
I'm
And then
surprised by that, by the way. Just because that
yeah,
means it's going into your own turn. So I'm surprised the gate is before your turn and not after your turn. Just
yeah, actually, that's sort of an interesting point in that you'll be getting an inspired fighter before your turn if you happen to trigger it there.
yeah,
Um, I think that the timing is awkward enough that I think it's fine that they like made it slightly stronger there. But then the action step piece, and that's sort of the other one that's like really weird because there's almost no ways to deal damage in an opponent's action step. There'd have to
yeah,
be like a reaction ploy or your own ability, predatory fighters, which we discussed, and that is contingent on a failed attack, and you had to roll one shield at least.
yeah.
So, a fairly difficult inspire. You probably are going to want to build around it. But then, sort of, the one other way that you have baked in to trigger this is this other ability, and that's called Savage Mauling. Um, and that is, again, it's used in the power step. You pick an enemy fighter that's adjacent to a damaged friendly Saurus. So you have to have at least one wound token on your fighter, and they have to have no charge tokens. So they could have moved, but they cannot have charged. You then get to roll an attack dice for each damage token that friendly fighter has. So baseline, that's up to 4 dice. You could be vulnerable and be rolling 4 dice for this. And for each sword or crit, you will inflict 1 damage on that enemy fighter. You can only use this ability once per game, but each time an enemy fighter is slain by this ability, you can use this ability once more this game. There's kind of a lot to unpack with this, but the big thing is if you are using this in your opponent's power step, that is another potential source of damage for an Inspire. I think it it will be difficult to know when it's appropriate to hold this until you can try and use it to get the kill, and when you need to just throw the dice as soon as you can so that you can try and get somebody inspired.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you're fighting against this warband, and you're attacking somebody that doesn't have a move or a charge token,
Yeah.
make sure that you can drive them back.
Or at least try. Like,
I my first time against them, I was playing Ilthari, and I did the Everdusk. I believe that's the name of the ability that allows me to add on damage for my own personal dead fighters. And so I went in with a 4 health fighter, did 4 damage to one of the Saurus, and they were like, what happened was I was so shocked I forgot that each of them were 5 health in that moment. I thought for some reason that Sokar was. I think this was Sokar that did me bad here. But I thought they had 4 health, and so I didn't think about driving them back. I thought about removing them entirely from the game and the board.
Yeah.
And my opponent was like, "Oh, okay," and like put 4 damage on him. I was like, "Oh shoot!"
Yeah, here we go.
And as a result, driving them back escaped my mind entirely. And then during the power step, they were like, "Okay, so here's Savage Mauling," and on 4 dice rolled 4 crits.
Oh no!
Or I think there was a mix of swords in there, but it 100%
Gotcha.
took my Elthari off the board.
Oof. Yeah.
My Guardian.
Remember then to always drive back
if you can.
If you can. And I suppose it ties in that the obstinate ability, of course, stops you from being driven back, which then makes this harder. So,
yep.
Like, again, it's this sort of continual like push-pull. They have multiple things working all the time that you have to think about. They have 3 big scary fighters, so you don't have good target priority. They could be holding treasure just to be in the way. They could be holding treasure to actually score. They could just be all out in your face aggressive. Like, to me, everything about this screams flex. Like, they are just doing multiple things in different interesting ways. So despite what it says on the GW website for this warband, I am willing to say strike that out. No pun intended.
Pun was intended.
they are a flex warband, and I will not hear otherwise. That being said, that's a pretty quick sort of run through of everything the warband does, everything about them. Kind of how we think they should be played. I don't know if you've caught on yet that we think they should be played as flex, but you could play them as pure strike. What sort of around this, what has your experience been with Jaws, and what has your experience just sort of been playing this early part of second edition? How do you feel they fit in and tie into what you've been playing?
Yeah, I've been able to fight the Jaws 3 times now, so fairly limited sample size here. And the first game, it was one of those where I kind of reacquainted myself with the War Scroll real quick, and then completely ejected it from my brain. I remember when my opponent pulled obstinate on me, I was like, "Pardon, you said until when? Until end of round? Oh, that's a problem." Okay. But I've lost to them twice, won once against them, and I think that they're it's going to be one of those warbands that you rarely table. You're always going to be managing, like, I feel one of their fighters until the end of the game, and they hit like trucks. So when playing against them, I have felt like I felt push or pull on how to approach the picture when I was fighting. I know you're going to speak more to trying them, pure aggro versus more flex. And when we tried that pure aggro match, I was able to play a little bit of keep away and use your movement speed against you. So like, that's something that I feel you'll want to do when you're against the Jaws in general, because I think that your biggest strength is playing keep away against them. But then as soon as they are played more flex, that gets harder. There's that push or pull of like, I can only keep so many fighters away from them because I need to remove them from tokens, maybe be on tokens myself. And so there might be the type of warband where you really want to stretch out the placements at the beginning as well
Mm-hmm.
of the tokens. Try to get those as far away from each other as possible, so it's harder for them to run from one to the other. Take advantage of their short movement speed there. But yeah, so far they just hit like trucks. I would say the other thing that I've noticed is I picked up pretty quickly that their Inspire is actually pretty hard for themselves, unless they brought card support along. They're relying on you to hit them with melee fighters, and I always, or at least right now in second edition, I've been running warbands that have at least 2 ranged fighters, and
Yeah.
so I've been using them to get my pokes in early so that I don't accidentally inspire um, one of them. So that's been something that has helped me manage fighting them as well. I think they're actually going to have like their matchup strength is going to be partially dependent on how many ranged fighters are in the enemy warband. Like the greater that number is, I think maybe the harder the matchup. Maybe that rule isn't universally true, but I think on average, just because of you're able to circumvent predatory fighters and therefore more chances on them inspiring. I think the higher amount of range they see, the harder time they're going to have. Whereas if they're up against a fully melee warband, they're probably pretty excited. Like, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gives your opponent fewer choices of how they want to manage things if they don't have those ranged attacks. So I would agree with that. I have only played them a couple of times myself. I've been trying a number of different builds just sort of to just familiarize myself with like what the potential deck combinations would be. And I've played them as like a close to full hold flex and then like a close to full aggro flex, um, just to like get a feel for it. I will say trying to play the like close to full hold did not feel like it really worked. Partially because I was playing into hold and it was hard for me to be able to get onto the treasure tokens efficiently and then stay there because my opponent was packing a bunch of push tech and like confusion and had all the tools that they would need to get me out of position. And so by being so dependent on that, I didn't have enough bodies to just like cover everything up. So that I think is maybe a lesson learned. And then for like as you push further away towards that more full aggro, the game plan becomes a little easier, but it also becomes harder for like the denial aspect of your opponent's game plan can be a little simpler, sort of to Skyler's point, where it's like, okay, I know that most of the scoring that you have comes from needing to hit me and you're fairly slow. So like you kind of can work around it. That being said, like they definitely have play. Like their matchups will sort of depend on how good your flex builds work. And I think they can kind of do a little bit of everything. So I would say if you're just starting with them, just try a bunch of different things and see what you like and what feels good. Um, I haven't tried them full strike yet, like to just jam complete aggro, but I have to imagine there would be situations where it would be great and there would be situations where it would feel pretty bad. I think the thing that has me the least interested in trying that right now is just knowing that warbands like Drom and Thricefold exist in the game, and trying to go full aggro against them is not probably a very smart choice.
Yeah, kind of the kings of aggro at the moment.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like, are you gonna out damage them? Like, do you really think that's possible? Because if you do, then sure, go ahead. But I don't think that's really gonna work.
yeah, and I think if you're if you're aggro and your Drum or your aggro and your Jaws, you're reaching for Reckless Fury,
Yeah.
and so you're using the same tool set too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You start to get some of those weird matchups. I think we'll jump into deck stuff here really quick. I just think since you already brought it up, one thing that we will sort of move around from how this was done in the last episode. Let's talk boards and treasure token placement strategy now. You already mentioned some of the counterplay strategy of like what you would want to do for trying to limit some of their play. Does any of that change depending on how the boards are oriented, or do you just think that it doesn't matter too much with these guys?
Ooh. I think if I have board choice against them, I am probably doing nines and
Yep.
parking things further in the back, because you're just going to be able to create that extra little distance.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to make it harder for them to reach things, whether that's reaching you or reaching the tokens you're placing.
Yeah.
So that would be counterplay.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense because when I've been playing them, I would prefer fives so that the board is a little less broad, and then there's fewer placements for the treasure tokens in no one's territory, um, which isn't always important, but there are a number of different cards that care about like hold all treasure tokens in neutral territory, or hold one in multiple territories, or hold all in one and then one other, or something like that. And those all become easier when there's one in neutral territory instead of multiple. And obviously
Yeah.
by only having those 5 placements in neutral, I think that's always easier. So that is always my preference, uh, at least so far. So it definitely makes sense that you would want nines for the counterplay. The other things that I've been thinking a lot about is trying to keep as many of the tokens close to the center line as possible so that it sort of like draws everybody to the middle. Because to your point, they are slow, and you do want to probably be able to charge with treasure tokens as landing spots. So if you can place the treasures close to the center lines, but also like next to starting hexes, you can probably charge, land on a token, and get an attack, which is like common strategy for trying to play flex anyway. But I think it's just something to think about with these guys a little bit more, given that they only have 3 movement.
Yeah, absolutely. I realized that fives and nines is not something that maybe we've done on the podcast too much.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So
Just give
just
people a quick rundown of what we mean by that.
yeah. So this is coined affectionately by the Battle Mallet podcast. So shout out to those guys; they're great. And it's previously we had longboard, max offset. You could say offset and describe how many uh, hexagons you were creating in the center, to create that neutral territory. But
Yep.
that's all gone now. And we used to have like, oh, we squared up against them, so we had the ways we quickly spoke to how the board was set up.
Yep.
And fives and nines is exactly that. And what it's looking at is neutral territory and how many hexagons that is composed of. So the wider orientation is called fives and has 5 spread like across the center, where there's actually a hexagon between each one.
Yep.
And then nines is your longer orientation. But it's not much longer, so it doesn't feel quite right to call it longboard.
Yeah.
As much as I think we each wanted to. And all of those hexagons, those 9 of them, are actually side by side as well, so there's no spaces between them.
Yep.
So that's just a quick way to kind of describe the orientation that you're experiencing in a game.
Yep. Makes it really simple to just look at the board state and be like, oh yeah, there's 5 neutral territory hexes, so therefore this is 5s, or there's 9, so therefore it's 9s. Like it's so straightforward. It's like why didn't we think of it? But anyway, so yeah, I guess the only other thing for board and treasure placement is just deciding whether you want the blocked hexes or not, and how much you care about being deployed forward and back. As usual, these things are matchup dependent, but I
Yeah.
think frequently you would want to forgo the blocked hexes and you would want to be deployed as close to the line as possible so that you have the best chance of getting into enemy territory, getting your attacks off. Um, the only way I would go the opposite is really if I felt like I had a matchup where I knew my opponent needed to be aggressive and I could outscore them by holding treasure in my territory. Which is not very easy because most of the decks, as we're about to talk through, don't actually allow you really to score for holding just in your territory.
Yeah. Yep. And if you're up against them, you heard what they want. So if you
Do
can
the
afford
opposite.
to, you want the opposite. Yeah. And the block taxes, they're not really there to block line of sight from attacks. That could be the case with your range 2 Rotac, but more the utility you're gaining from the block taxes is you want to put a feature token on the other side of the block text and make it harder for them to get to it with their range 3
Yeah.
or move
Yeah.
3.
And just makes the math sometimes a little awkward if it's like, oh, I have to go stand next to this thing and oh, now this charge or whatever is just that one hex further because I had to go around this block hex. So
Yep.
all right, so that is a quick sort of strategy overview, different stat overview, but a big part of this game obviously is the deck building, and we have 6 rivals decks, and we will just run these down in the order they were released, as to say, as a possibility, how do we sort of feel about this pairing? Like, would you use this deck with this warband? And sort of some quick reasons as to why. So starting us off, we've got Blazing Assault. This is our first core box strike deck. I guess just I'll just say, out of the gate, there's plenty of reasons you would reach for this deck. So I think it's better to start by highlighting some of the reasons you maybe don't want to use this deck. So what do you see as maybe some of the reasons you wouldn't want to go with what maybe would look like a pretty obvious choice on the surface?
Yeah, it's going to reduce your scoring ceiling by picking this deck.
Yep.
This is going to be one of the main reasons why you would consider not diving into Blazing Assault. And the reason for that is you have to think, are you bringing Annihilation along? And
Yeah.
I don't think this is a warband that is going to be bringing Annihilation along, because as soon as your opponent knows it's in there, they can before the end of the game, they can take that one fighter that they have left and play keep away. So you're not going to get the 5 points from Annihilation, and that's a hell of a lot of points wrapped up in the 16 glory. Is it 16?
Yeah, 16.
16 glory budget. For a moment, my head ran to 18, but 16. So what I mean by that is all of the decks released thus far have 16 glory in or spread across, the objective deck.
Yep.
So for me, that's generally the biggest detractor from grabbing Blazing Assault. Is that lower scoring ceiling if you're not willing to go in for Annihilation. And Phil, how do you feel about Annihilation here?
Yeah, same thoughts, and that was sort of what I was alluding to when I asked the question. Is you probably don't like this deck because of what it does to your choices for objectives. Annihilation is not usually a good pick, and it puts every other card, all the other end phases in this deck are at 1 glory each. And there are some in here that are fairly straightforward, but they better be, because it's an end phase for 1. The one thing I will say for the objective deck is that you do have a number of pretty good, although I'd say kind of luck dependent surges. So you get things like Branching Fate, Critical Effort, and Perfect Strike, which are all good surges. They're all things that work pretty smoothly, but you have really no control over when they're going to happen because they're all dice dependent. So I think the only way you can possibly hope to use this deck to like really good effect is if you're going full strike and you just know like I'm going to be rolling as many dice as I possibly can at every possible moment, and just through weight of numbers I'm hoping that these come up at some point.
Yeah.
Because I think to both of our points, you are paying a pretty steep tax in not having any multi-glory end phase cards.
One of the things I want to call out here, though, is I think this is super healthy for the game overall.
That is probably
Because
true.
you have 7 bounty wrapped up in every warband, right?
Yep.
And so when you design a deck like Blazing Assault that has tools to help you acquire that 7 glory, that can put you an edge over the objective decks that aren't, or the decks that you're fighting that aren't going to be able to pull as much bounty off of you, right?
Yep.
So if your strategy is kill everything, then your hope is to get most of 7 glory across the field. And so keeping what you can get from your objective deck then lower feels just right to me. So I don't think this is the worst pick in the world. Like, I don't want to say like,
No.
hey, don't reach for this. I think it does a great job of being a strike like base. Just know that your glory is in the models on the table that you need to take down.
Yeah. You are sort of relegating yourself to the fact that you must get some kills if you really want to have a high enough glory ceiling to win games. And yeah, it's not to say that Blazing Assault is a bad pairing. I'd say that this is like actually a pretty solid pairing in terms of the power deck. Like, some of the power cards that you get in here are just generically very powerful cards. You get things like Sidestep, and you get things like Healing Potion, Determined Effort, Illusory Fighter, Commanding Stride. Like, these are all things that you would love to have. It's just, it really comes down to how much do you feel like you can afford to take that objective deck. And there's also a slight problem with the upgrades in that you have a lot of 2 glory upgrades that you would want to reach for, and so you can end up having a very expensive upgrade deck very quickly if you reach for this. So something to be keeping in mind. I think the last thought for Blazing Assault is that if you are already leaning flex and you want to pick up some utility, I think actually Blazing Assault can be a good deck for it. Where, like, if your primary deck is something else, like Emergard Sentinels or Countdown to Cataclysm, Blazing Assault can actually be a nice piece for like just adding in a few extra pieces. Countdown's actually probably a bad choice, but we'll talk about why that is here in just a second. But I think there's a lot going for Blazing Assault, and then there's also a lot of detractors. So it's an interesting deck. And one that is probably not like my first choice for these guys, but it is certainly not a bad one. And if you are going the full aggro route where you just want to smash everything, then yeah, grab Blazing Assault, 100%. The next one is sort of the polar opposite, and that is Emberstone Sentinels. And this is our full hold deck. What sort of things draw you to this one, and what sort of things have you feeling like maybe this one might not always be the best choice?
Okay, so something that draws me to this game and to the decks that I enjoy playing are these niche like strengths or these cool moments that maybe you don't build an entire deck around, but if you're me, you do.
Sure.
And that's just the idea that your Venomites can move for free, alongside, another fighter that's activating. And where I'm going with this is with your leader. So with Crowjacks and the Venomites, just those two on objectives, you can score supremacy.
Yeah.
And I love that.
It's very, very cool.
So the reason that's possible is supremacy is now, if 2 or more friendly fighters with a total bounty characteristic of 3 or more hold treasure tokens. So yes, the Venomites are 0 in this picture, but that's okay because they just need to be there to help get the 2 models that we need
Yep.
to meet that requirement. The 3 is being the whole bill is being foot here by Crowjacks. And this is I think worth having fun with and trying, because it's 3 glory payout
Yeah.
for a
It's a
moment like that.
big, huge amount of glory. It's very, very potent. And because you can do it sort of with just 2 fighters, there is a difficult situation where it's like, well, what if they decide to hold Crowjacks and the Venomites in the back and then send the other 2 Saurus up front? Can you afford to just like run past these 2 Saurus and then hope to stop the hold in the back? I mean, that is like the perfect, in my mind anyway, that's like the perfect description of a flex warband, where it's like they're going to put you in a hard spot and you've got to be able to answer it.
Agree.
Um,
So I know that was one thing that pulls me to this, but it is such a pull.
yeah, it's very, very cool. Very, like, sort of works with some of the stuff they're trying to do. I think, to my point from before, saying like there's some difficulties with hold. You do have to keep in mind like how much of your deck cares about holding. When I built that flex deck that was closer to like full hold, I was using like the one half was using Emberstone Sentinels, and I think the thing that I got myself into trouble with is that I like more than half of my objectives cared about holding, and it got to a certain point where I was like, man, I am like doing this uphill battle because I don't have the bodies. I just don't, I can't cover enough ground frequently enough. Like I could get onto the token, but then if I got pushed off, it was like, okay, now I have to like find somebody else to bring in here, or hope I have the push in hand. So I think
Yeah.
that's sort of like a word of caution, I guess, is to like, if you're building this flex and you are reaching for Emberstone, like be cognizant of like how much of your deck now is suddenly revolving around the treasure token hold, because it can become tricky.
Yeah. And if you
Um,
think about that, like let's say it's a 50-50 split. You don't know the order you're drawing those cards in. So all
yeah,
of a sudden
exactly.
your cards are saying that you need to hold, or some of your cards are saying you need to hold, some of them are saying you need to strike. And it's like, well, which cards do I play to right now? And so all of a sudden you're creating this push or pull on yourself, where
Yeah,
it seems like you can never find the right answer, in your board state. So you probably want to lean. You don't want 50-50. I don't think.
yeah,
Generally, you're going to want to lean one way or the other, and either dip into holding a little bit, so that when that moment comes, you can capitalize the most potential off of it, um, or go the other way and make sure that you're not being asked to leave the tokens very often. So,
yeah,
uh, yeah. And that equation gets harder the longer the game goes on. They've got pretty good survivability, but if you're down, this is like elite warbands trying to hold in general. Like the longer the game goes on, the less bodies you have to fill that picture out.
yep. And to that point, not that this is like a full strategy or breakdown or anything, but it's sometimes counterintuitive when you're playing elite hold, because you actually need your end phase scores early and your surges later, which usually we're like, hey, we want our surges in our opening hand so that we have a chance to like get those flowing and get that early glory. But doing that can mean you draw into the end phases late, and then you don't have the bodies that you need, which was kind of the problem that I was running into. So something to keep in mind if you're reaching for this deck. I will say the other thing that sort of draws me to this deck is it, in my opinion, has the single best power deck in the entire game right now. Between
So
having
potent.
some really good upgrades, some really strong effects, plus having things like Confusion and Sidestep and Healing Potion all in the same deck, having ways to like hand out guard tokens, like there's just a lot of really good tools. So like if you need a toolbox power deck and you are even remotely interested in holding treasures, Emberstone Sentinels is probably one that is worth reaching for, and I do kind of like this as like a secondary option for these guys, but uh, it does make things a little awkward sometimes. So just keep that in mind. And like Skyler said, if you're gonna go the flex, figure out like what side of flex you want to be on. Like you can't be right in the middle, most likely.
Agree. If there's one card I could just highlight in this deck for them,
100%.
as you were saying, so much of this is already good on its own. But I think just a fun, like, why is this good with Jaws specifically? Brute Momentum, I think, is a pretty underrated card right now. I think we've actually talked about this. You feel this way too. So this fighter cannot be driven back while they have any charge tokens. And I think this is particularly good with them because as soon as you have an inspired fighter, you have that 4 dice, you can rush a position that is, or a token that's already being held, and like overrun into it. And so not only have you just acquired it, but you've now given yourself this I can't be driven back state without having to take on a guard token, which so it's another way to end up staying in put. And like when you combine that with there being a guard token in the deck, you combine that with the fact that they have an obstinate, you just increase the reliability of putting your opponent in moments where it's like, hey, you have to pull me off of this by killing me. Like there's, I don't have another route for you to do that. And I've got 5 health. Good luck.
Absolutely.
Or 6 with great fortitude. So.
Yeah, right. And maybe a sort of a sneaky extra with that healing potion. Okay, so right now we're sort of saying, hey, both Blazing Assault and Emberguard Sentinels are like usable, but build with caution. You like be smart about choosing these. These aren't not like your obvious choices. How about our actual flex deck, Pillage and Plunder? What are your thoughts on this one when you look at the Jaws?
The Jaws, maybe our games are coloring my opinion here, but I felt that it was harder for them than I expected. I think that early it risks getting opponent damage on them pretty easily because the risk of playing Pillage and Plunder, or like what you sign up for when you sign up for this deck, is you're going to be taking on more stagger tokens. It's the cost to like a buttery smooth objective deck. So it opens them up to more damage, but it also, with 4 fighters at move 3, I don't think they quite have a good enough. I don't have a word for this yet. So I'm making this up on the spot. We'll call it like the tempo of the pairing can be really hard for them because it's pulling them to those tokens and asking them to take on those stagger tokens. But if your opponent knows you're playing Pillage and Plunder, they're going to also be trying to get onto these to block you. And in our case, we both were playing Pillage and Plunder. So I was able to stay ahead of the tempo. And that seemed to be quite difficult for them. I think it pulls them to too many of the tokens as well when you're looking at end phases like Torn Landscape and the 3-pointer for
Strip the Realm.
Thank you.
For no one holding or there being no treasure tokens. I fully agree. When I first looked at this on paper, I thought, with free movement from the Venomites, being able to like have this extra fighter that you don't really care about to go and flip the tokens, like that's actually going to be amazing. And then in practice, it was really tough because, to your point, this deck actually says like, hey, you delved an odd treasure, and it's like, oh man, I didn't get any odds on my side of the board. Like now I have to like go find this one over there that I'm gonna have to get this 3 move fighter over onto. Like I care about the numbers in a way that the other decks don't, and I'm also having to like put them into danger now because I have to go into enemy territory, and then I'm gonna have to give myself a stagger token, and they're slow. So it's like everything kind of ended up working against me. And to your point of like, hey, you can kind of get behind on tempo, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me for that tempo problem is that like, even if your opponent isn't scoring from delving and playing Pillage and Plunder themselves, if they just passively are like, I don't care about this treasure token, let me delve it. They've now potentially like slowed you down because you have to get onto that now feature token, delve it back to a treasure token, and then delve it again to have it count for some of your scoring. So
Yeah.
you really can end up in a bind where you're like pushed in some bad directions where like your opponent is kind of getting to dictate terms to you, and that's really not what you want in a warband. So I think, without even talking about the power deck, I think I can pretty safely say that Pillage and Plunder is like a hard option for these guys. I don't think it's impossible, but I think you have to be prepared for some pretty bad matchups. Um, and like, you just don't have the board coverage either in the terms of bodies or speed to sort of make some of this stuff work really well.
So it's an interesting conversation to find myself in because I'm extremely hot on this deck, and I think
It's
it's universally on average like a really good reach for.
yeah,
But here, yeah, leaning away from it.
and like there's a lot of good power cards in here. I would say it's like a slight step below the power decks for both Emberstone and Blazing Assault, but like you still have some cool options. You've got like Prideful Duelist to heal in enemy territory. You've got Commanding Stride for the big push. Uh, you can get some extra guard tokens, some extra accuracy. There's some push tech, teleportation. Like there's some cool options, but on the whole, I think you're often going to find that trying to delve is actually a little harder than you expect it to be, and that will make it less of an ideal choice. So I'm kind of out on this one for these guys. I might try it again at some point, but for right now, I'm feeling like this is probably not one that you want to reach for.
I know when we played against each other, another thing we noticed was like trapped cash as a card, because when you're looking at decks for Jaws of Itzl, it's worthwhile seeing how many of them can help you with your Inspire. Like,
oh yeah,
and
for sure.
factoring that into the equation. And with trapped cash, like this card is pick an undamaged enemy fighter within 1 hex of a treasure token, inflict 1 damage on that fighter. So you kind of need this in your opening hand. Otherwise, the reliability of this card goes down immensely.
Yeah, by
Because
a lot.
treasure tokens are specific, and over the course of the game, both players are going to be delving. So who knows if that's going to be true, and undamaged, as well. So like it's just as the game goes on, this card just plummets. But it can be a really nice opening card. It's just probably not worth like a full power mulligan for. So it's a hard card to include, but it really can help with that Inspire in round 1.
Yeah, if you manage to get it early, like it can be great, but I think on the whole, you're right. It is a tough one, and it's not really providing you those ping options to help with the Inspire, and that can be a problem. Now that doesn't mean that it's not like something that you can end up getting from other decks. Like I think having ping as like a option in the deck from either side is actually fine. You don't need like 2 decks with pings, but you really kind of need a good reason to be taking the other deck then if you're saying, well, that one doesn't have ping options. And I think it is worth mentioning Blazing Assault and Emberguard Sentinels don't have the ping options either. So you're having to lean other directions to find those things. I guess actually there might be one. Anyway, I'd have to look it up. I don't remember the name of the card. There's like one that lets you make an attack action in the power step, and that would also actually technically work. Like the weapon profile is on the card.
Was that in Emberstone?
I don't remember. Like I said, I'd have to look it up. I think it's in one of those two. So I guess in a way you technically have a ping there, but it's also an attack. So like you'd actually have to roll some dice and hope they don't roll defense, and like there'd be some limitations for getting that to happen. Onto a deck that does have some pings and some pretty good ones, actually. We have Countdown to Cataclysm. This is our mastery deck from the core box. It's been funny, sort of from our start of second edition, reading through the decks, doing our reviews, and like coming out of those now with more experience in playing the decks. I've actually grown to like Countdown to Cataclysm a lot more than I did when I first looked at it.
I've grown to like it less.
Really?
I think for the same reasons, though.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to take a guess that one of the reasons that you've grown to like it is the reliability of two glory end phases here.
That is certainly one of the reasons why I like it. There are a couple. There are a couple good end phases that I like being drawn to in this deck. I'd even actually go so far as to say there's a few. Um, so the ones that I particularly like having for this pairing are Wreckers and Spread Havoc, which are probably the two that you have the most issue with.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
It's just a deck that's like, hey, how about a free 4 glory
Yeah,
in
why
2
not?
cards? Why not?
So, just as a quick rundown as to why I like both of these. So, Wreckers specifically says score this in an end phase if the number of damaged or slain enemy fighters is greater than your Cataclysm value. Being a flex deck, you're going to be wanting to fight. You have a couple of different ways to deal damage outside of actually making attacks, and you have some bigger, beefier fighters, so you're not likely to have. Um, well, there's also the caveat that like the countdown stuff is optional. Like you don't have to even advance the count. So like if you really were dead set on scoring this, you just don't advance the thing, the tracker, and then you can guarantee that like have two enemy fighters damaged, you get 2 glory.
Yeah,
Seems
and
pretty good, right?
yeah. Well, and to jump on that a little bit, in the previous game, each meant all, and
Oh
so
yeah, right.
when you look at this pot card, it says that you can advance your Cataclysm 1 step. The first time, oh well, no, not that one. Yes, the first time a friendly fighter is slain, but I was looking for can advance your Cataclysm tracker 1 step after the last power step in each battle round for each feature token that has no enemy fighters on it. So, in this edition, each doesn't mean all. Each means like process individually.
Like one or more, right? That's
Yep.
exactly how it's worded.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the biggest surprises for me at Worlds from a rules standpoint. We all went into Worlds knowing that there would be rules that we like still had old thinking on or hadn't like understood the ramifications of, wholly. And this was the big shock for me, was that you could process. So like if there were 5 spaces on the Cataclysm, or 5 feature tokens that weren't occupied at the end of a round, and you wanted 4 of those, towards your Cataclysm tracker, go for it. And I'm not saying that like that's good or bad or anything. Like in the context of figuring that out when I did.
Yeah.
But it is really strong, and it's why I was being spicy is because I really liked what I thought was interesting counterplay with Wreckers. Like I thought Wreckers was kind of a tenuous card where it was like, oh, like even if this is optional, they're having to choose all or none. And I actually had missed the optional ability on this entirely. The all or
Yeah,
none
same.
picture originally. But now that you can racket that up, to just before the 2, or just before the 3, and hold it there until you're able to score Wreckers,
Yeah.
score Spread Havoc. It just gives the Cataclysm player such fine control, and the other player not so much. So they're really good cards. Like if you're playing Cataclysm, I recommend bringing them.
Yeah, they're very good. I didn't actually read what Spread Havoc does. Spread Havoc is probably one that I even think is maybe just problematic in general, because it just says score this in an end phase, gain a number of glory points equal to the Cataclysm value, and it maxes at 2, but like it's a guaranteed 1 or 2 glory
Yeah.
with no counterplay. Nothing, there's like no way to stop it from triggering. It will always score. It's just, is it for 1 or 2?
So I think I will enjoy this deck more as time goes on, and the fact that it's a plot card comes into play.
Yeah, when you lose other options because of yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious. Like as time goes, this is our only plot card. Is like that's correct, right?
Yeah,
Um,
right now
yeah,
is the only
yeah. So,
one.
so right now, the landscape for Countdown to Cataclysm could be like greater than it will be eventually. Where if you pick another plot card, you end up forgoing Countdown to Cataclysm and potentially these, rather or this for glory with ease.
Yeah,
So
for sure. So I guess to say like there
jumping
are
out of the rabbit
some
hole now.
yeah
Sorry.
there's some cool options for Jaws. I think like those two cards are good for literally everybody, but there's other things you can reach for in the objective deck. You've got like your flex option in set explosives, which is a hold two or more and have all in one territory held, which is calling back to what I was talking about with the board placement, where you probably want just one token in neutral territory. They also have a surge that sort of wants the same thing. This is shocking assault, which is you hold after an opponent's action step, you hold all the treasure tokens in neutral territory. So if there's just one, you can sometimes walk a Saurus onto it, obstinate that Saurus, and be like, if you're not holding confusion, I'm not going anywhere. So like some cool choices there. The awkward part of set explosives is then anytime you're standing on treasure, your opponent has to be thinking, oh man, are they about to score 2 glory because they're standing on like 2 treasure tokens?
Yeah,
Um,
which I think, when you're up against Countdown, that's the one that you're thinking about. Because like you really can't think about wreckers or spread havoc. And so I guess the nice thing is that alleviates that mental pressure and
yeah,
moves it all to set explosives.
sure.
Uh,
So then you just focus on that one, which I think makes sense. And like most of the other scores in the deck are kind of like one-sided as well. There's not like a good way to stop them. Uneven contest is kind of the only other one, but like I don't think you'd ever play this card. That's just not a good option. Hold each odd numbered treasure token. Like what? Maybe if there's like some deck down the road that's like, ooh, we really care about numbers, you could pair that. But no, I don't think draws want that. Uh,
their cheeky naming convention, uneven contest. What
yeah,
are you holding? Wink, wink. Wonder if it's the evens. No, it's uneven.
yeah.
Uh,
So like I like the objective deck. I also, like we said, there's a couple different ping options in this deck. You've got one in Sunder the Realm where you get to roll dice for every fighter that's within 1 hex of neutral territory, which is yet another reason why I like the fives alignment, because there's actually more hexes, I think, in total that are like within one of neutral territory, because there's like all the hexes around a hex then that
yeah,
count.
I
Um,
think so too.
and so you end up with these like bubbles where it's like, oh man, that's like a lot of the middle part of the board suddenly that's covered. So you roll dice based on your cataclysm value for everybody in there, including your own fighters. So you do have to sort of work around that. But if you roll hammers or crits, you inflict damage. So like even if they're vulnerable, you can still get them with that. So it is flexible in that way, but you also have to roll. So it's not like an automatic, just disgusting hit everybody in the middle of the board. I don't know who would have ever done anything like that. Um, and then the other option is called Total Collapse, which is a roll dice equal to your cataclysm value. If you have any swords or crits, you can pick a fighter. You can, and this is the one that Skyler talked about earlier. You can pick a fighter. If it's an enemy, you deal them 1 damage. If it's a friendly, you can deal damage up to your cataclysm value. So this one just becomes more reliable as you get a higher cataclysm value. But again, you can ping anybody. Doesn't matter how many wounds they have or if they've been damaged already or anything like that. So good options for getting inspired.
And
Um,
improvised attack is in here. This is the
yeah,
card you're thinking
actually,
about.
yeah.
Yeah,
Improvised
yeah,
attack is in this deck. So you have actually 3 fairly reliable pings. I wouldn't say improvised attack is like perfect, but if your cataclysm value is 2 or higher, it's not too bad. So
yeah.
like some really
Uh,
cool things.
By
And
the
then
way, I did check the other decks, and there's no pings in Blazing Assault and Emberstone and Sentinel, so
okay, yeah,
we
yeah,
can
yeah.
stand firm
In
in
our
our deck
yeah,
pairings here.
yeah. So those two are pretty. They don't always offer the best options, but like there's a lot that you kind of want in Cataclysm here. And I guess the final things I will highlight, and I know I've been sort of gushing here, but this is the deck that I've found to just be really great for these guys. Um, you have Utter Conviction and Driven by Pain. Driven by Pain gives you a reaction so that if you get driven back, you can react to heal, um, which is just putting your opponent in such a horrible spot where it's like, oh, this 5 wound scary fighter. If I leave them next to me, they can hit me back. If I push them away, they get to heal. Like, kind of perfect for flex, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Utter Conviction is you get to set your save characteristic equal to your Cataclysm value. Um, and then you can't modify it further. So, like, it would even prevent temporary modifications to reduce your defense if your opponent has those. So,
I
that can
think
be a crazy late game card.
word. I think another fun thing to call out here that goes really well with the Jaws is, so we've got 3 options for ping, right? So 3
Yep.
ways to help us inspire, and I think that goes really well with a surge that I normally don't look at. Overwhelming Force. Score this immediately after friendly fighter's successful melee attack if the attack roll contained 4 or more dice.
Yeah.
So, you've drawn into Overwhelming Force, you have it in hand. You have some way to ping your opponent, either in hand or in your war scroll. And you do that, going into your turn, all of a sudden you've unlocked those 4 dice naturally on a fighter of your choice to go towards Overwhelming Force.
Yeah.
So that's nice, because like I think one of the things that's usually rough about this deck is the end phase are bomb, but the objectives, bomb in the good sense, by the way, but the
Yeah.
surges, I've found that when I reach for countdown, the surges are the shortcoming, and so when a surge comes online for your warband, like Overwhelming Force, and helps with that picture, it increases the strength of this pairing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess in total, I think Countdown is maybe not the most complete deck, but I think that it gives you a lot of the tools you want for this particular warband. And so then it's just a matter, like, if you reach for Countdown, it's just finding another deck that fills those gaps. Like you said, you're probably going to need to pick another deck that has good surges. So in some ways, you could even go for Blazing Assault, because Blazing Assault actually has some really nice surges, although they're random. So, like, something to think about there. But it's, I think, like, for my experience and for just playing in second edition so far, Countdown feels like it is providing a lot of really great add-ons to another deck, where, like, as long as what Cataclysm is doing sort of works with your warband, it's going to probably, like, round out everything else that you want to do. So that's probably why I'm reaching to first. That's sort of, I'm going to be like starring Countdown as, like, if I'm going to build a deck for Jaws, I'm probably starting with Countdown and then seeing what I can figure out from there.
That makes sense. I would agree.
All right.
I think it's a great starting point.
So that's all the core box decks. We have our 2 additional decks that have come out. I want to start by talking about Rack and Ruin, mostly because I think most folks are probably already aware that Reckless Fury is a pretty strong deck. So let's talk Rack and Ruin. What do we have going on with Rack and Ruin? Is there any sort of draw to Rack and Ruin for Jaws?
There is some pretty tempered ping in here. I say it that way because I think when this deck came out, Brian went, "Oh no,
it's more pings."
Well, what was the name of the deck at the end of first edition?
Rhymeworm's Bite.
Thank you, that he hated so much.
Yeah.
He was like, "Oh no, it's Rhymeworm's Bite 2.0." Like, but over time, he's like, "Wait a minute, it's Rhymeworm's Bite 2.0," like, in a positive light.
They fixed it. Yeah.
And I would agree. Like this, everything in this deck, if you're familiar with that old one, is a more tempered picture of that old one, and a lot of the scoring is mirrored here and there. But in the frame of Jaws of Itzl, what it means is you have, what is it, like 5 different cards that you could help you with that ping
I
picture?
Yeah, I think there are 5 total power cards that can ping, but I think some of them are on the like your opponent has to choose one of 2 horrible options cards.
And
And then against
they're not.
Jaws, your opponent's probably not going to be like, yeah, sure, inspire and deal a damage to me. That seems great.
Yeah, that's a pretty much guarantee that they're going to pick the other option. So you gotta think about that. Like, hey, if I'm bringing this card, is it? I'm probably not getting the inspiring damage off this. So is it worth the other option?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Um, I will say that I think that I agree that it's cool that it has those ping options. The scoring for me is a little awkward. There's a lot of positional scoring in this deck, which is actually true of Rhymeworm's Bite as well, to your point. But I think positional scoring is tough for these guys because, as we were talking about with Pillage and Plunder, their board coverage can be difficult. They're slow. Um, they have only 4 bodies, so if you start losing fighters, like being in the right spots can be tough sometimes. Like things like Alone in the Dark, I guess, are actually easier with elite warbands, but on the whole, like there's just some weird things. So you're kind of all over the place with the objective deck. Not that any of it's bad, but like it's just kind of weird. I don't know exactly how you'd make it work. And then yeah, so to your point, like you really have to be sure that like you're okay with the secondary options on some of these pings because your opponent's probably not going to just let you inspire. I think almost always that's going to be the worst play than trying to do whatever the other things that the cards do. And then I don't know that any of the upgrades feel like super strong options in for this particular pairing. And maybe that's just because we don't have another deck that like really pairs well with this one. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I I think Rack and Ruin is hard to reach for in general right now.
I agree.
I don't think you reach for it here. I was looking more at the scoring just now, and like out of the frying pan, for example, scores in an end phase of 3 or more damage-friendly fighters that have move and or charge tokens are in enemy territory.
I mean,
And
yeah,
like
it's like one of the worst possible options.
it's like you've got 3 5 health fighters, so you've got the health to help, but if one of them ever goes down, this card's junk. So like I'd never run this because you can't. I
Yeah.
mean, your snakes can't help. They take on damage. They do that whole dead thing. Uh,
Yeah.
um, and I don't know. So I don't think there's enough in this picture for melee elite in general.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
I actually think that you could reach for this deck, and I should just do this for fun. Like originally, so I don't really like burn down playstyle where it's like your cards that are dealing the damage, which is funny because I know I had a minute there where like one of the things I was known for was the Miari's Pingifiers.
Yeah. Right.
uh, so whoops. But generally, I don't dig that playstyle for myself. The burn down style. But I think that this would pair really well with and this is a tangent with the Ember Watch, Ember Guard,
Man.
Ember
Yeah. Yeah. I
Ember
think they're the
Watch,
Ember
Ember
Watch.
Watch, and I know it's something that I've mentioned on the cast before, but I should just build it up and give it a go and maybe report back at a later date, like how it really did work with them. But I think
Yeah.
that there's play here with that deck. But melee elite and the Jaws themselves, it's going to be it's
Yeah.
going to be one of the last decks you reach for. I feel
I,
even with the gambits.
I think that's probably true. I think this one's close for me with like Pillage and Plunder, where it's drawing you to doing things that naturally the warband isn't strong at doing. Um, and maybe more so with this one than pillage and plunder. So I I tend to agree. I guess just to as an aside, I was also thinking that like having good maneuverability and ranged attacks would probably help with Rack and Ruin for all the different weird positioning scoring that it has. So yeah, Ember Watch makes a lot of sense for that deck. So I think it's an interesting deck, but I agree. I think it is one we probably strike from the list when we're building these guys, unless we really just want to try every single deck with them just to see what happens, because maybe we'd be surprised.
Which is fun, by the way.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, like there is value in doing that.
for sure. And I know it's been a while since I've done a What the Decks, and I know there are some of you out there who are like, Skyler, win. And I'm working towards it. I don't, the show is not dead. But one of the joys of that show was playing combinations I would never have put together myself, whether that
Right.
was reaching for a warband I wouldn't, or pairing them with, a rivals deck that wouldn't have been my first choice. It forces you to play out of your comfort zone, and you can really find gems, both in just like fun moments, but also you end up viewing a card in a context you had never considered, because here it is in front of you, and that can shine a light on a card that you'd overlooked, or even a deck that you'd overlooked. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And I'm going to take it as a personal experiment to build this up with Ember Watch, since I've mentioned it a few times now, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And I'll try to fight the Jaws with it.
Okay, sounds good. We'll do it. To round out our discussion of pairings with Jaws, I don't know that this one needs a lot of like reinforcement as to why you would reach for it, but Reckless Fury. This deck, my goodness. This one, when I first read through the deck for like our previews and stuff, I was like, wow, okay, this is a deck that is like hyper aggressive and probably will really only be useful to those warbands that really want to lean strike. And then Worlds happened, and I've had actually more time using the deck and just playing around in general in second edition. And I think this is just like almost always a good choice for anybody. Um, a lot of the scoring is fairly straightforward, except it does kind of need you to be aggressive. But like most warbands aren't full hold these days, so like I think you're pretty safe to just be like, yeah, I'll charge a few fighters. Like I was gonna do that anyway, and yeah, I'm okay with charging in enemy territory. Um, and then the power deck, like not every card in here is amazing, but a lot of the cards in here do a lot of what you want them to do for this warband. Like uh just for instance, headlong charge. Here's an upgrade that helps fix your speed problem in a big way because it's +2 move while charging specifically, but most of your Saurus are going to need to be charging anyway, so like why not make them speed 5? Um or like utter
It's ridiculous.
or utter ignorance, where it's like, hey, this big scary 5 wound fighter, let's just make sure that they have to get hit one more time before you can bring them down. I like I said, I don't know that we need to go into a lot of details. I don't know if there's any specific cards you really want to highlight that are like, oh, for this specific pairing, this is great. Um, I think this is just a really strong deck in general, and so like I think this is an easy one to reach for.
Yeah, I really, so I enjoy messing around with the charged out state. So like one of the things I enjoyed a lot towards the end of first edition was figuring out ways to manufacture it.
Yeah.
And this deck is that puzzle.
Oh, yeah, but like turned up to 11.
Yeah. And so I was attracted to this deck initially as a result of the fact that it would allow you to manipulate that state and get to it a lot more. And so that's definitely here. And it's a way to overcome the Venomites, lack of charge as well. There's multiple tools in here that you can use to get them a charge token at any point in time. And so you can, knowing that, it allows you to open up that move, plan that out, for them, so they get that move token, and then award them a charge token as well.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I think that is a strength of this deck specifically for Jaws, is being able to help the Venomites sort of into situations that they otherwise maybe wouldn't be able to get into, or I guess get the Saurus out of. Maybe is the better way to think about that. Um, I also think there's some interesting play, and this isn't really specific to the Jaws, but like some of the things the Jaws are doing with their flex game plan is kind of like playing a little control-y, where it's like, I'm gonna sort of force you into some bad choices here. And this deck also has things that allow you to do that. They've got this gambit, ploy called Reckless Attitudes, where like, oh, you have to make a charge in your next activation. Sometimes that's going to be like a really bad situation to be in, because it's like, oh, great, my only option for charging right now is to charge into this giant Saurus, who, if I miss, I'm going to have to, take a damage. Like, that doesn't feel great. uh,
yeah,
Fury of Akshi, like, oh, great, you're stuck next to this Saurus guy. Well, now you can only charge if you're next to him. Like I said, those are things that aren't uniquely good for Jaws, but I do think that like Jaws has some tools that helps leverage those things in ways that make them maybe even more punishing, because they have like that the strike back from predatory fighters. And
yeah.
um
with
yeah,
with reckless attitudes, I do think I'm glad you did highlight that card, because I think that is interesting. A lot of the times reckless attitudes, the way I use it, is like, let's say the one fighter they haven't used yet is holding an objective, and it's
oh
like,
yeah,
okay,
sure,
I want to force that fighter off. But the thing with reckless attitudes is they can always choose to focus. So actually, in the scenario, I was trying to like fabricate like a second scenario there. Yes,
yeah,
that's a reason you could try for it, but if they really need that position, they're just going to focus. When I've used it the most, it's been they don't have any fighters that don't have a charge token on them yet, or that they want to move.
yeah,
So you force them into that focus position. And essentially, with the Jaws, you're now saying either focus or come at me, bro, and potentially inspire me.
yeah.
It does change the application a little bit, and I think that is interesting. And Fury of Actually is just rude as hell. So
It is very, very rude. It is a tough card to deal with. There's like a lot of weird like little niche cards that you could maybe get use out of in this deck that are harder in other decks. So like Bellowing Tyrant is usually not something that I would want to use, because it's like, oh, I'm going to take a turn to use this core ability with another fighter that I upgraded so that I can like, they have to have a charge token, but then it lets me push other fighters. How am I going to like do this in an efficient way that makes sense? But like, if you hand off a charge token onto the Venomites, and then the Venomites are the one taking this action, like, that's maybe not even a horrible game plan if you're playing flex and you want to push your two Saurus onto holding positions. Like, sort of a weird card to like have in this deck, really, because it's all about like charging, and that card is like really kind of a flex card. So
yeah,
um
it's also for those. I like bringing this up anytime Bellowing Tyrant gets brought up. It's a core ability that you can use even if your warband isn't charged out.
yep,
And that's fascinating. So just keep that in mind. Trust me, like if you check out like the restrictions
yeah,
on like having a charge token, it doesn't list other core abilities. It actually specifically says like, hey, you're not moving, you're not
yeah, it's
attacking.
the main ones from the rule book are what are stopped. So
Yep, you're not going on guard.
um
So yeah,
yeah,
anything like this is fair game.
yeah, which is, it's interesting, because I don't think there's a lot of other warbands that are always gonna like reach for that, that are using this deck. But maybe you would for this if you're building it as a flex pairing, even though this is like a hyper aggressive deck.
Yeah, I
um
think the last card I'll highlight real quick is just Push Through. It's a great card.
yeah,
But the reason I'm highlighting it for them is, we've already mentioned that Gore Chosen are kind of like the king of aggro right now. And Push Through is a card they don't take because they really can't afford to.
yeah,
For them, it's restricted to fighters. So pick a friendly fighter with a bounty characteristic of 2 or less. Inflict 1 damage on that fighter. In your next action step, that fighter can use core abilities as if they did not have any move or charge tokens.
Yep.
Now, Gore Chosen would love to use this, but if they did, it would only be on Herrick's. They really want to use this on the Gore Hulk or Drum, but they're at that 3 bounty. Whereas here, you have 2 Sauruses that can utilize push through, and Crojax is enemy number 1 for your opponent anyways. So if a fighter is going down early, I think often it's going to be him, and that doesn't hurt your ability to use push through any on the other 2 fighters.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely used it when I paired with this deck. I think it's a really strong card. It has some niche application and as a way to self damage. So if your like opponent is really dead set on not hurting you so that you can't bite them, technically that is another way to get a damage on a fighter so they can start that train.
Cool.
Start biting people.
It can also get you more dice then to try
yeah. So if you're like at 3 and you want to like really push it and go to 4,
nice.
That is a way. Is a niche application. You wouldn't always want to do that, but I think that it is a fun use for that card that your opponent might not expect. So lots of really cool power card options. We don't need to go too much further. I will just highlight there are 2 surges in the deck that I think do work fairly well for the Jaws in particular. First, you have Frenzied Rush. This is a card that normally is kind of asking that you have charged with 2 fighters and then you can score it. It says score this immediately after an action step if friendly fighters with a total bounty characteristic of 3 or more have charge tokens and are in enemy territory. A lot of times warbands are not really interested in just charging their leader into enemy territory right away. But Crojax is pretty terrifying, and I wouldn't want to tangle with him immediately if I didn't have to. And since you can score this for a single charge from Crojax, there will be times where your opponent first activation of the game scores Frenzy Rush. Regardless of whether he lands that giant 3 damage attack or not, that's pretty great. And then there's Living Bludgeon, which is maybe one that people don't reach for as much, but it's a score this after an action step if a friendly fighter has a guard token and a charge token and is not in friendly territory. So if you're playing your flex plan and you're like, I'm going to go stand in neutral territory and I'm going to go on guard after having charged, like Rotok is a good fighter to try and do something like this with, because you can charge, get your token, go on guard, and score a surge for it. So that is, unless you have any other thoughts for Reckless Fury, that is a rundown of all the decks. I think we can just do a recap if you don't have any other thoughts for like which ones we felt were good for them.
Let's jump into a recap.
All right. So first we had Blazing Assault. This was sort of like a mid pairing, I would say, where we're kind of like, yes, but Emberguard Sentinels was sort of in the same boat where it's like, yes, good tools here, but like be cognizant of like what you're having to have as sort of your restrictions for either one of these. I think
you're reaching for them for a game plan.
Yeah. So like Blazing Assault, you're probably more reaching for it for reliable power cards and then some surges. Emberguard Sentinels. I always want to, or it's Emberstone Sentinels, isn't it?
It is.
I always want to say Emberguard Sentinels, but that's not right. So if you are reaching for that one, it's more for the high, it like raises your glory ceiling, and then you also do have some cool power cards. You're needing to supplement your surges for that pick. Pillage and Plunder, we were pretty low on this one. I would say this is just kind of a tough one to build around because you don't have the movement. Countdown to Cataclysm, this was like number 1 pick, probably start here and then figure out what else you want to do.
Yeah, I think so.
Reckless Fury, also very strong. This one is just, I think fairly safe to say, like in a neutral situation, you don't have like any sort of weirdness with the warbands that you're really considering. Like if you just are like, I just want a generically powerful deck, I would almost always be reaching for Reckless Fury. And then Rack and Ruin, which we were like, yep, pretty low on this one as well. It's sort of, it's an oddball. Maybe it has some better play than I'm thinking, but it feels like a weird one. So that just leaves some discussion about actual decks that we've built and played so far. I know you've really only played against them, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So and at least some of those games were against me. So I will start by saying I've kind of built every pairing just on Underworld's DB just because I'm a maniac and I love Seraphon, but I also was just curious, like, how do these all feel as you pair them all together? Um, and I have really liked Countdown to Cataclysm paired with Reckless Fury. I thought that pairing really made a lot of sense. Um, it gives you some really good, reliable end phase scoring where some of it is kind of agnostic to the game state. Some of it is aggressive, but not like so aggressive that it's detrimental to your game plan. And then you do have some pings to help with inspires, and you've got some really powerful power cards. So it's like you kind of have everything that you want. And then the other one that I thought made a lot of sense, but I haven't gotten to try yet, was actually Reckless Fury paired with Ember Guard. The only downside to that pairing is you don't get any pings. So you really are kind of, you have to play that pairing.
Yeah, push through would be the only one you get there. Yeah.
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 And then, well, that's self ping. So that won't work for Inspire.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because it has to be an enemy. That hurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
For a minute, my
yeah, if it was
I
just
thought that
deal
card got
any
even
damage,
better.
that'd be
Yeah.
great. But no.
Okay.
So like the weird thing with that one is you're kind of having to have that counterpunch where like your opponent really is gonna, like, if you want to get inspired, you're gonna force, or you're gonna hopefully need to force your opponent into coming to you and attacking you. And I think Ember Guard, like, of all the decks, does allow for that, because like we said, we can have two fighters hold treasure and suddenly you've got supremacy, and it's like, uh-oh, I don't know that I can afford to just let you have supremacy. So that was sort of the thought process with that deck. But yeah, not having the pings feels bad. And then the other one that's just kind of like the, I don't know if I'd say no brainer, but like a sort of obvious pairing is to just put Blazing Assault and Reckless Fury together and be like, done deal, let's go smash faces.
Yeah, have a good scrap.
Yep. I think other warbands maybe use that pairing to better effect, but it certainly wouldn't be bad. Like, I think you could do a lot of work there. So I don't know. What was the other, if you remember, what was the other deck that you played into?
It was Reckless Fury and Pillage and Plunder.
Oh, interesting.
Which I generally find that to be a good pairing, because Pillage and Plunder also has ways to help manipulate the charged out state.
Yeah, because some of your cards give charge tokens.
Yep. And there's good repositioning available in Pillage and Plunder to help with where you need to be, whether that's for scoring purposes or reaching your targets. I just, in our case, like, it was Elthari's against the Jaws of Itzl here, and I'm not trying to say that like that the Jaws can't do it, but I think Elthari is one example of a warband that's better suited to do it with that pairing.
Yeah, and when you were playing against that Reckless Fury, Pillage and Plunder pairing, that wasn't me.
I thought you were asking because that was a deck that you didn't mention.
Yeah. So that was the one that's another one that I played that I didn't think worked very well. And I think, to your point, it also maybe didn't make a lot of sense. You said you played a third Jaws pairing, which was not against
did. Shout out to Jared. I don't remember what deck it was. I do know Pillage and Plunder was part of the equation.
Okay.
For sure. And so he was exploring that. It was his first game with it. He beat me here.
Oh, okay.
And this was with Elthari's. I got tabled.
Well, that'll happen.
And I think Countdown as well was the other part of that picture. I could be wrong there. But I seem to recall being afraid of the different things that could score there.
Yeah, no, that's
So
fair.
um,
Uh, that
yeah,
is one that I certainly looked at and thought this seems kind of all over the place, but also Countdown is like uniquely situated where it doesn't care that your feature tokens are face down. Um, like it actually is in some ways benefiting from having feature tokens be face down because it helps you continue to advance the tracker because they're not held necessarily, or
yeah.
well, because it's feature tokens with enemy fighters on them. So I guess it doesn't actually matter if they're face down or not, but like it can help prevent people from holding treasure. But then I was
I
just
guess what's
thinking, set explosives cares about holding treasure, so like you are kind of like working against yourself there. So um,
yeah, when you're working towards the countdown itself, or the tracker, at least it's not counter synergetic at all.
yeah, there's nothing that's like stopping it from being useful. Um, like to what you had said earlier, Pillage and Plunder is like just a generically strong deck. I think.
Yeah,
I just yeah, I personally agree that it doesn't feel quite right for these warbands, but I
that doesn't
I
mean you
do
won't find
think
success with it.
yeah, it doesn't mean you
Yeah,
won't find success with it. Like I guess it's important to point out that like while we think Rack and Ruin and Pillage and Plunder maybe are not like the most synergistic choices or maybe won't always work the best. I mean, like by all means, try them out. Um, Pillage and Plunder has some cool options. I think if your opponent isn't playing Pillage and Plunder, it actually is one where like it can become. Um, I don't want this to sound wrong, but it can become like a skill check where it's like, oh, do you know how to counter Pillage and Plunder? Because if you don't, this is going to go badly for you.
sure.
um and so I think maybe in some ways you could pair Pillage and Plunder with these guys in the you know effort to basically say like if you don't know how to deal with this, you're probably not going to win this game. And it just sort of can put pressure on your opponent that way. But I think for someone like you who played Pillage and Plunder at Worlds and really likes that deck, you're like, yeah, I know all the different tricks of like how do you sort of counter some of these scores. And if you get behind where your opponent is the one doing the delving first, all of a sudden it's like, man, I don't even know if I have enough time to score all my cards. So,
Yeah,
um,
Pillage and Plunder is just a deck that I've grown to like more and more. Like originally, I thought it was like too strong, I guess, on my first read, and like that there was little counterplay. And when we're talking about things that has surprised us through like experience with second edition, what has surprised me with Pillage and Plunder is actually how much counterplay
yeah,
is available there, and I'm pleasantly surprised there. Where funny on the flip side, Countdown,
yeah,
it
there's no
is a
way
bit of
to,
opposite for me.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can't counter it,
no,
which sometimes feels bad when decks don't have counters. Um, so very cool. I mean, like this is not even close to an in-depth conversation about everything you could do with Jaws, all the different things. I think we'll probably continue to play all these games. I think it would be great to recap later to say like, oh, we've done a lot more games. We've got some more experience. Here's maybe like what we feel like is a really optimal deck. But for now, I think this is hopefully helpful to give y'all an idea to be like, well, if I want to build this warband and I don't quite know what I want to do, here's some like thoughts of like where do you start? So
absolutely. That's the goal here, right? We're
yeah,
thinking about Jaws. We want to help you thinking about Jaws, and get those creative energies going, and see where it leads for you, the listener. Like, feel free to write us on like our Discord. I know we will hit that in the outro as well.
absolutely.
But we love hearing from people there. Hey, we tried this out. That's fantastic. You can email us as well. But just thank you. I'm getting ahead of myself, but like I'm also really enjoying the end of year, and so just thank you all for listening, and being a part of What the Hex, and uh you know uh caring about the ideas we're throwing your way and the energy we're trying to bring forward. Building decks with Jaws and trying them out, and all that jazz.
100%. Very well said. And it does segue us very well into our outro here as we wrap this up. I think, to Skylar's point, if you are having fun with these guys, building them out, or if like you've played against them in your local and you're like, man, I keep seeing this thing that I think is really gross. Yeah, let us know. Share that knowledge. It's always fun to talk deck building and different tricks with warbands, especially warbands that have some interesting abilities like these guys. To Skylar's point, if you want to reach us, you've got our email at whatthehexcast at gmail.com. You can find us over on Twitter at whatthehexcast. I don't think we've set up anything on Blue Sky yet. And then, as Skylar also mentioned, our Discord, we've got a lot of people always chatting in there. So feel free to drop on by. As we mentioned early on in this episode, if you are interested in any other of our content, go over to themortalrealms.com. We've got a whole bunch of stuff about the lore in Age of Sigmar universe.
And that's the best place to grab the link to that Discord as well.
Yes, 100%. In terms of what is coming up next for us, not 100% sure. Haven't locked it in. We've kind of all been a little busy with end of year stuff and the holidays, but it would be really cool to do a year in review episode. I think that might be warranted, but we'll see what happens. Otherwise, Skylar, are you ready for a Flavitex quiz?
Yes. We'll go yes this time.
We'll say yes, but that's sounding like a no. All right. So this one is not attributed to any specific fighter. I will not give you the extra clue yet, just because I feel like sometimes if we give too many clues on the outside, it can make it too easy. So here we go. The fastest warrior is often the first to spill the enemy's blood.
Okay. I'm getting Reckless Fury vibes.
Okay.
And
you would be correct.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm also feeling it could be Bloody Momentum.
You would be incorrect if you guess Bloody Momentum. I will. So the extra clue is that I went out of my way to pick a card that had the art with one of the Saurus on it.
There's no way this is Living Bludgeon, is it?
It is not Living Bludgeon.
Okay.
I thought about doing Living Bludgeon, but I thought that one might be too obvious because the flavor text on that one is just Grar.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think this is a card not very many people reach for. I'll give you one last clue.
Okay. Yeah, Living Bludgeon is the card with the art that is burned into my head. Let's see.
It's actually somewhat similar to that art.
I'm gonna have to give up.
Okay.
What is it?
So this one is Savage Sprinter. With the surge, you score this immediately after an action step if a friendly fighter in enemy territory has 2 or more move tokens.
Got it. Yeah, I've forgotten that card exists.
Yeah, nobody really reaches for that one. I don't think. Yeah, we'll have to see if there's a warband that makes sense for that one. But so there you go, Flavor Text Quiz. Your recommended listening for this episode. I had to. We'll go with Guns N' Roses from their Appetite of Destruction album, Welcome to the Jungle. For What the Hex, I've been Phil.
And I've been Skyler.